of the Point Gremlins podcast. My name is James, or Jonas the Red, and here with me, my co-host is Delirium, or Alex. We have a bit of a shorter episode this week, because obviously we know the tournament is in 3 days. Very excited for that. It's going to be live here on this Twitch channel if you want to watch that, or if you want to watch it in person, just come to the building and hang out on the observation deck with me and Prowler. We're going to be streaming it right there. We have 3 topics today. We have going over the stages of what makes a regular and what makes a good regular and personally. And we're going to be talking about making some balanced teams back in Army when you guys watching us making the teams. And finally, we're going to go over, of course, our best players of the 7-day leaderboard.
Absolutely, and then kicking us off right away with the stages of regulars. So me and you both kind of put together what we kind of look for in the stages of regulars, and we have kind of a different take on it. So for my take, I have 7 stages, and starting off from the very beginning, stage number 1, I have very beginning player. So you playing your 3rd or 4th session or something around there. You just kind of gotten the bug and you want to play some more. Stage 2 is recognizing like the popular areas around the field and beginning to utilize those. Stage 3, recognizing the better players and like what they tend to do around the field and beginning to kind of copy that a little bit. Stage 4 is establishing kind of a good fundamental and muscle memory for playing. Stage 5 is creating a playstyle that's very unique to yourself, so kind of developing your own personality on the fields outside of social. Stage 6 is fundamentals are just on autopilot now. You don't really need to think when you play, and your movement is kind of the key aspect of your play style. And then stage 7 I have as Nirvana.
So what you did with yours is that you said you took it as how can a player get really good and what that kind of looks like as they're growing up. I took it as more as like how many steps does it take before we consider you to be a regular. Right, so mine only took 4 steps for it. So what I call like the first rank of players would be called the safeties. Generally, that rank to 1 to 13, we call them safeties or newbies when they come in as their guns on safety, right? Like they actually have not a whole idea what's going on. They're walking around with their gun down. They're not doing stuff like that. I'll get more into detail about that. My stage 2 is it's kind of a fun and new hobby they're starting to do. They'll start to come like maybe they'll spend their first 3 sessions, but after that, it's like, oh, they're starting to come back maybe once every 2 weeks or something like that. And they realize that, oh, this could be actually like something I do every once in a while. 3rd step is maybe I'll take this a little bit serious. They're around level 35, level 44. And as you know, at 45 is when you get your first Eagle rank. So just before that, they're starting to be like, man, I'm actually kind of okay at this. I'm getting pretty good at it. Because in this laser tag sport, you can make yourself look really good if you're playing decently at all. And then once you're at level 45, once you have that Eagle next to your name, that's when I consider you a regular officially. Once that you get away from the mosquito wings and the majors and the colonels, and I finally have that Eagle, and you have the dread through the rank 45 all the way up to 96. I think that's when I say you're on to the final step there. Do you want to go back to talking about yours, and we can kind of go in more detail about each of the steps?
Sure. So starting off with step 1 is pretty self-explanatory. So that's just the very beginning. So your first few sessions, and that's just I think it's always so tough to get past that first stage, and that's why like the vast majority of people don't. It's because you have to play that first session, and you have to get just dunked on. Because like
yeah,
imagine you're one of the we have a session where there's 20 regulars, which is not uncommon at all. There's a session of 20 regulars and then just 10 brand new players coming in for a birthday party. And you're one of those 10 new players, and you walk out of there with like maybe 10 kills, like a .0, like a .05 KDR, and you're like, holy cow, that was rough. But in order to kind of move past that stage, you have to be like, man, that was rough, but I think I could keep doing that.
Generally, you need like as a new player, you need like the kind of the stars to align to put you on the fast track of understanding this could be a really fun sport. Generally, if you come in with a very large group like that, and it's a birthday party or bachelor party you're coming in for, that's might be your one and only time, no matter how fun the session was for you. Either you live far away, or you don't want to go unless we want to go back with that group. It was like a one-time event type of thing, or maybe it was too expensive. There's a myriad of reasons why you wouldn't come back. But what's going to happen is in that session, you are just going to get demolished because the skill floor you have to get at maybe to start to be able to move a little bit is much higher than you think it is. I'm not going to say it's very high. You just kind of have to walk a little bit faster and keep your gun up to kind of understand what's going on. But they're just not doing that yet at this stage.
No, not at all. And kind of moving past that stage, I think the first thing that one of those players recognizes is they will normally look around and see what other people are doing, and they'll be like, okay, where are these people going? Because that's the first that's the big question that a new player will always ask me when I'm on the field with them. They're like, where do you go? Where do you go to get those kills? Because they always immediately assume it's the location that gets you all the points and glory or whatnot. So they kind of recognize the more killmongery areas on the field, such as like the patio, the broken room, upstairs, places that are generally not that hard to play, but can get you just a lot of kills because you're killing all those new players that you were like the last week.
That might be a pretty good way of getting your first wings, I guess, your first few steps of trying to understand how to play the game. A long time ago, when I first started playing, a really old regular named Asian Chaluper, he told me that when you're just starting to play, don't worry about trying to move around a whole bunch. Really think of it like this: the game is just a race to your spot right at the beginning of the game. It's definitely not a very good strategy right now, especially, and as the meta is progressing. And if you're trying to get a player, definitely don't lean on that crutch a whole lot. But if you're like rank 9 or 10 and it's your first couple sessions, maybe try and find those really clever spots and just try and get to them and learn them. What I want you to more do is to learn how the field works and what things you can kind of abuse, quote unquote, to get better at the game. Really learn what that map is, and that can really help you do it.
Yeah, you're totally right. Just like when I started playing as well, I started playing around I guess I'd call it the Qui-Gon Jinn era, where it was rare to see more than like 4 or 5 regulars in a session. Normally, it'd be either like a 1v1, a 2v2, or you'd just have a session all to yourself. Would be pretty normal. So a lot of the times there was less of an incentive to move around because you could just sit in one spot and just destroy new players because it's a lot harder for them to figure out how to get you out of there versus like an experienced player that knows how just to get you out right away. So there's not an incentive to continually move around your spots much at all.
That's a great point. That needs to be preached more because there are so many regulars right now playing. Just the skill floor for pretty much all sessions has just been heightened so much. In those sessions, we right now they're so rare. You call them bot lobbies, right? If it's just like 2 regulars on each team, honestly, you could accidentally just avoid the other regular on the other side of the map and just shoot people and turn people's lights on all day, get those points for free. It's a great segue into stage 2, by the way, learning the particular minds of the field.
I think that was stage 2, was it? Yeah, learning the popular locations on the field. So then moving on to stage 3, then would be recognizing some of the better players and in how they behave on the field. So their special quirks, if you were.
Yeah, and that will obviously depend on when you come in and who you see to play, or who you look up to as a player. Some players, when they'll come in, they'll start to recognize new players. Believe it or not, the new players that come all the time kind of get like idolized. I know people will notice Woodland sometimes and be like, "Oh, that's the Woodland guy. That's the guy. That's the guy. That's the tryhard guy." All the time, and they'll kind of like follow him and recognize him and idolize him and copy him exactly. Have you seen any stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's true even for when I started playing as well. When I started playing, I'd say the best two players on the field were probably Qui-Gon Jinn and Turtle 008. And my play style was very developed based off of theirs. So like I stand perfectly sideways, just the same way that Dylan does. So I don't show any of my sensors. I move in a very similar way to John, so very quick burst movements. Uh, my playstyle was just very heavily developed based off of them.
And but the thing is though, if you're just trying to exactly copy a regular like that, you're not developing any of your own stuff, and there's a good chance you're just doing it at like a worse level. And if you're just copying somebody else, then you can be easily countered because they already kind of know your style because you based it off of somebody else, right? You're just doing it at a discounted rate. You're probably doing something wrong. Have you seen any copies of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's super easy to tell because a lot of people when it's their probably like fifth or sixth time playing, that's when they start to they've seen the same person in like half of their sessions and stuff like that, so they have been able to recognize where they go, how they play, like how they hold their guns. So there'd be people that it's kind of weird. Not very often you see it anymore, but people normally hold the gun kind of in a very similar way now. Uh, but I've seen people like when I first started playing, they would copy the way that Money Shot would hold the gun, and he would hold the gun with like his hand on the trigger or his finger on the trigger, and then his left hand would be at the very bottom of the mag. So you'd see people holding their gun like that.
That's I'll definitely put a visual on the screen for that. I didn't think so. Holding the gun in a particular way, and we're talking about fundamentals, right? So they're copying the fundamentals exactly of what people are doing, and you're just kind of copying them. Some people will develop their own strategies, methods of how they hold it, reload it, move it left and right, and even how far their stock is, or even minutely what color their red dot is as well.
Yeah, and that does kind of move us on to the next stage where I have stage four as establishing good fundamentals and just kind of a decent muscle memory for things like reloading and I guess flicking your gun around corners and stuff like that. And I think this is the step that takes the longest and is without a doubt just the most important.
Yeah. Like if you're learning any other sport, this step is probably going to be much earlier on, or maybe this is just as early as it normally would be, right? Learning those basics and basic fundamentals for anything is going to be so important for to build your understanding of the game off of. If you just are going for so the example the other day was, or a couple podcasts ago, was Navy SEAL, right? Where it's really interesting to watch him go where he's like in his Eagles, and now he's only going for tubes. Now he's just learning to play domination now, and he's doing better at it now. He's kind of done it backwards a little bit, the fundamentals.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point is how uh, it's not the same for everybody the way they develop it. But I think regardless, this is kind of a stage that there are so few players that have actually moved past. I think generally you'll see players start moving past this stage when they're in like their like upper 30s of their Eagles or stuff like that. But even like I still come back to this stage. I will rehearse different fundamentals. I'll try different things just to kind of either mix things up or develop my own personal play style a little bit more.
I definitely say I'd be on if we're using this stages. I definitely put myself in stage three, not even in stage four yet. I'm still kind of learning what everyone's doing. I haven't really put a whole lot of time into getting my own muscle memory yet. And if you've seen me play, I'm changing it all the time. I don't really have a grip yet. I've found yet. I don't have a really reload strategy I've learned yet. I'm trying a bunch of different stuff and try and find the best for you. And you will spend a long time on this stuff, and that's fine. Right now, since there are so many regulars, I'm would not be surprised. Everyone's about like the same general skill rating. There's no like extremes yet or huge outliers yet. Everyone's kind of learning together how good they could be yet.
Yeah, and I think a big thing to talk about with this with these tiers in particular is uh, even recognizing spots that work and learning fundamentals that work is kind of not the end of it. So say you find like one or two spots that are always good to go to, you can always rely on those spots. You still need more. You can't you can't just sit you can't just sit in petty, you can't just sit in broker room. In order to be a good player, you need to have just a wide variety of options available to you, at least in my opinion.
I think that's so correct. Back when I just started playing recently, I told myself, okay, I'm just going to be really good at lower market. And I think a lot of people will kind of start learning like that. They'll pick a place to be like crazy good at, and they'll just like dominate that side or that section of the field incredibly well. But force them out of their spot whatsoever, and they're just a flounder. They can't get back into their spot, and they can't be effective as a team. They're just useless. You're clipping the wings off of someone if you've noticed that their skill is based off of that. I think it's an okay thing to do in the beginning, but once you're around this stage, absolutely practice new places and try and learn them.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think I actually would argue that it's a very good way to start off playing is to just dominate, or not even dominate, but just focus on certain areas of the field. So just pick out Mansion, Market, or Ghetto and just practice those areas of the field to get used to that before you branch out and try the rest. Because I'd say I'd want players to learn that place very well so they can practice fundamentals there, and then they could branch out after they have the fundamentals a
And
little
then
bit
they can
better.
translate those muscle memories they're gained from learning the ghetto, learning the market over to somewhere else. And it would just be much smoother and efficient process. If you've ever learned something before, you get better as it as you go on, obviously. And but there's so much different dynamics when it comes to different sections of the field. It can be hard a little bit to transfer from being a ghetto player to a market player to a mansion player. But some of the stuff kind of translate over, right? And obviously you're getting better every single session. Well, it's just going to make sense the more you do it.
Yeah, and I think that really brings us to the next stage as well. So after you've kind of begun to really get your fundamentals down to muscle memory and everything like that, is when you kind of begin to develop your own play style, when you begin to have a very unique presence on the field.
Yes. When you start to really understand the map itself in a just a different way than everyone else. I'm not going to reveal names, but there are some players that won't just play like the market, for example, or they won't play like the whole field, but they'll kind of play like this weird section, like maybe in between. Maybe they'll play like the embassy and the mansion together, and they'll rotate behind that whole thing. Or maybe we'll be switching between the mansion and the market back and forth like that, or like do a big triangle back and forth between like their spawn and something like that. And they're moving around in these really weird ways that aren't predictable at all. That gives you such a huge advantage over those other players that are just below like your new skill level, right?
Yeah, and I think I don't want to say that these stages are necessarily a must follow in order. So I think there is plenty of players on the field that have a very unique playstyle, but certainly don't have their fundamentals down. I think you can move forwards and backwards in these stages without necessarily doing them in order.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I just think generally, I think 60% of the time that this is going to be the list they're going to follow. Not they're just the most standard person. I do see in a lot though, where they'll just skip around the steps altogether.
And I think developing a playstyle that is very unique is another really important thing on the field because it makes you as a player an individual problem. So if I'm playing against a player that has their own very unique strategy, I need to have my own strategy to counteract it. I need to recognize what they will do and counteract it
You
instead
ever
of them just being some player with good fundamentals that'll just kind of walk around every once in a while.
you ever start a session and well, maybe you can't answer this question exactly, but those of you that are listening, but if you can, go ahead. You ever start a session and you're thinking about the other team? You're thinking of one player on their team. It's like, man, what does that person even really do? That's either going to be you just don't know what they do generally because you don't see them a whole lot, or they're on this step and they're doing stuff that what you don't even understand where they could be going because you just don't. You at least see them all over the place. They're not predictable. It's such a huge advantage to it.
And you use that word predictable, which I think is one that I definitely throw around a lot, and I think it's another thing that's super important to playing on the field is being unpredictable about where you're going to go and how you're going to play. I think once I know where you're going to be, you may as well be dead already. If you surprise me and you pull something out where you either sweep behind me, you come from an angle I haven't seen before, or something like that, that's when you become a real threat. Once I send someone back to spawn, they have 3 options of where they're going. And if I'm able to predict where you're going every single time, I'm going to kill you every single time.
Yeah, that's definitely happened to me exactly from you. I think you've only seen me play a couple of times, but you already figured it out right away. I think there's one time on top of you were on top of Marketplace and you killed me once, and I went to go respawn, and I came from out of Embassy side into Lower Market on that left side near the China room, and you just knew exactly where I was going to be, and you just lasered that before I was even there. You're probably in your head, you were like 1, 2, 3, 4 to 10, and then shoot, and that's how I'm already there. Like, what? Well, also I didn't know that there was a huge shadow that I broadcast right there, and obviously you're on top of Market, so you can just see so much more of me. There's just stuff I wasn't thinking about right away, but that is so huge to think about, and when you can start doing that naturally, just start to think more instead of putting yourself on no thought mode when you're playing. That's huge. That's so awesome when you can start to do that.
And I think that's actually a really interesting thing that I'm going to add to tier 6. So tier 6 is when you have the fundamentals down pat. You are a killing machine. You are a walking aimbot. There is nothing that gets past you. But the other thing that I think that I'm going to throw into that tier is being able to understand the other players as well. So understanding what players go where they're going to approach from, what are their favorite spots, how do they handle their gun differently. All of those things kind of correlate into that tier as well.
If you can make a list in your head of, let's say the other team has like XYZ players on it, and you can think, where does X person go pretty much all consistently all the time, and you happen to have this list of all like 55 regulars right now. I guess there's more than that, right? But there's 55 players in the tournament. That's the number I picked. If you can like think of any one of those players and you can assign Jeffrey Applebottom to always playing in the ghetto for some reason, and you can kind of predict that, and along with all the other notes you may have with everyone else, that's also incredible in order to have it. If you have it and you have them all down, that's great. That's also just a lot of learning you have to do. You have to watch a lot of people, watch a lot of games, and understand a lot of things.
Absolutely. You have to make a mental, essentially a mental timer in your head as to what players go where, and then you establish a rotation checking all those spots. So you might be focusing on up to maybe 5, 6, 7 regulars at a time as to where are all the predictable spots that they could be in, and then rotating around, checking those spots cautiously, checking some spots that they might be trying to sweep behind you, recognizing which players are going to do that. I sent that player back to spawn 5 seconds ago, so they're probably leaving now. So where are they going after that? Listening to those beeps, knowing the player that you just killed, where they're going to go after that. All of that stuff I think ties in to really start becoming a problem for the enemy team.
This is where you can start to talk more than I can understand. I'm not up to that level yet. I don't really have that level yet. I think a long time ago I used to be pretty okay at laser tag, but man, it's not anymore. The game has just changed on like a fundamental level now that I don't really understand. You got a much better grasp of it than I do.
I think fundamental to me, the things that matter the most on the field is I rank players on I give them a grading scale based off of 5 different categories, and that's the sheet that I have that I need to finish for you. But I have them ranked on a category of field presence, so what areas of the field they dominate, so what percentage of the field you like to play. Uh, Charisma, so just like how talkative you are, how good you play as a team, and how you can encourage other players. Fundamentals, so just how you move around the field, how you reload your gun, how you can move your gun, all of that. Shoot.
He's referring to this booklet he made, right? So we know the tournament's coming up in a few days. And while he was drafting, or before the draft happened, he wanted to get like a profile for all the players, right? I'll put it up on the screen here, like the template he set up. But he gave them all a rank S through F, right? In these 5 different categories and plus some extra notes. And it's a really interesting way of looking at it because I don't think anyone else has really like done that yet or done it and shown people it sometimes. Obviously, he doesn't want to show it to them all the time, right? Because you don't want to like hurt someone's feelings.
I'm not the
But some
nicest.
people he was okay with sharing it to.
Yeah, the other two categories I just remember them where they were player knowledge, so how well you know other players, and objectives, so how well you are able to play the different objectives.
Yeah, and I loved that booklet, and I obviously want it for Saturday so I can reference it there, maybe talk about it a little bit there. I don't want to just put anyone on blast up there, though. I want to be a little bit gentle with it. But it's important that the tournament's already happening before I can officially see all of it. I don't want to be unfair with that. I'm not even playing anyways. I don't even know why I have to say that. I just want to be fair. I don't want to make it seem like I'm giving people hints that don't deserve it or something like that. Your final step.
Yeah, final step Nirvana is just the idea of trying to reach a perfection on the field. So it's always about revisiting step 4, so getting to know your fundamentals. It's revisiting step 5, getting to develop your own play style over and over again. And that's something that actually I think changes just all the time on the field. The way I played 2 years ago versus the way I play now is very different. And that's partially because I've developed as a player, and that's also partially because the meta of the field has just changed so drastically.
Yeah. So Nirvana, I also think of it as like how clear you can keep your head the whole time too, and willing to go back to these previous steps and work your way down them again, just willingly whenever you need to like make an adjustment to your play style. You're just like, okay, so I got to learn this, and you're just thinking clearly the whole time, and you go, don't turn your brain off ever. You're always kind of thinking and adapting and moving in a pretty much in a Zen way. I don't think anyone's there yet. Generally, I think everyone's still got to like. Well, maybe there's some players that are like that are willing to keep learning. Obviously, no one's the perfect player. I don't think it's what we're aiming for here. It's the willingness to go back to it. There are very few players that can move back to the previous steps and work your way through again and learning all the time.
Yeah, and the the way you have to think about it is sometimes I'm on the field and my brain is just off. I walk off the field and I just I think to myself, did did what even happened in that session? I don't remember any of it. I was just purely on autopilot. There was nothing. I wasn't thinking even a little bit. And sometimes I walk off the field. I'm like, okay, I was trying really hard. I need to work on this, and this. The way I was moving on the field was really good, but maybe my fundamentals needed some work. Maybe I didn't recognize what this player was doing soon enough, so they got me a few more times than I should have let them. Stuff like that is a great way to look at this step as just the continuous learning on the field.
What I want to start seeing regulars do is open up like their cargo shorts or something and pull out a notepad and be taking notes after games, maybe even during games. I don't care. I think it'd be really funny to see to watch them pull out a pen and paper and start taking notes on what someone else is doing, what they're doing, whatever. Because the fresher those thoughts are, you don't have to wait until the end of the session to get a pen and paper. The more easy you can dedicate it to paper and have it written down forever. There's really value if someone could do that too. I might even start doing that. But the thing is now you have to find a place to carry around your pen and paper in your pocket and not let that weigh you down even a little bit while you're playing, moving so quickly.
Another great way to do it is playing with a GoPro or playing with a camera. Studying the VODs, first of all, it's kind of fun to play with the camera on. And second, you can go back, you can watch, and you can recognize where certain people were, some things that got you killed, where you messed up, where you did great, what you can continue to work on. I think it's a really good way to look at playing.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. I learned something from that because I was watching my footage with one of the regulars on a different Discord, and he was watching my footage, and I kept doing this thing where from breach side I would leave off of burlap sack room, out the burlap sack room way, go through burlap sack and come out, and then go up the staircase to market for some reason. I'm like, why am I doing that? Why would I ever want to do that? Because you're obviously, when you leave the burlap sack room, you're exposing to Nate's hallway where Nate's going to laser you down the thing. Why even give him that chance of shooting it when you could just cut out the front and go up the staircase? Not even a reason to take that chance, right? I didn't realize I was doing that until I had my GoPro and put it on stream, and someone pointed it out to me. I was like, oh, yeah, I think more people should do that too. Not everyone has a GoPro, right? Maybe I'll let you borrow mine. I'm letting people do that a lot recently. The thing is, though, if I'll let you borrow my GoPro, the problem is how am I going to get the files to you, right? So bring a flash drive and a laptop and an SD adapter so I can give you all the stuffs right there too. Because I'm not going to send it to you in a compressed zip file over Discord or email it to you, something like that. I don't want to mess with that. It's not my footage. Do it for me.
Just bring an SSD card. Makes things
Yeah.
easy. I, it
Moving on to my list really quick.
yeah.
I focused it more on what it takes to be a regular, and I kind of gave some numbers ranks to it. Step one, like I said, I called it the safeties. Second is this is the kind of new fun hobby for yourself, and maybe I'll take this a little bit seriously. That's the third step, and fourth step is officially you're a regular. Safeties is 1 to 13. Second step is 13 to 35. Third step is 35 to 44, and regulars right when you get your first eagle. Uh, Safeties rank. That's like your first 3 sessions. And actually, good question. For your first session, you're a brand new player. What level do most players on average end with at the end of a session?
3. I think the answer is 3.
3. How many points does it take to get to like 10, 13? Do you know all these off the top of your head?
I believe it's 1,000 points for your first 3 rank or your first 5 ranks, and then after that it's 2,500. So it, uh, I'm not sure the math on that. To get to rank 10 or 13 probably takes a good 3 or 4 sessions.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
generally what I see.
actually it's 500 points. 500 points for your first couple levels.
Oh, oh, thanks.
So I think
Okay,
it's 500 for ranks 1 and 2, and then I believe it's 1,000 for 3 through 5.
okay. So what's happening there is that you spend your first couple sessions, and then you're gonna have the bug, and you could either drop the sport there and move on. But the important part is that when do you consider someone a regular? And I'm noticing that when I was looking at what these ranks are, I'll put the ranks up on the screen as well. Not everyone knows what they are. You get some really exciting ranks that changes like your symbol a whole lot from ranks like 1 to 44. And then once you're hitting the Eagles, you're in like this dry run of evil going through the Eagles list. When do you consider yourself a regular? Consider someone else a regular.
I personally considered myself a regular when I hit my eagle. Before then, it was kind of a different crowd too. It was a lot less of a welcoming crowd. Everybody was a lot more like hyper competitive and very toxic. So to include my to wedge my way into that group, I definitely waited till I was at least a regular to put myself in with them, or until I was in my Eagles to put myself in with them. Uh, Nowadays, I think I consider people regulars well before they get their Eagles. So normally around like rank 25, 30 is when I will who recognize the username to the face and learn who that player is.
Coming back, that's one of my favorite parts about iCombat right now. How we're not so closed off anymore. What really closes off sports like this is when they start to get really gatekeeperish and they start to push like not treat new players very well. If you're coming in a lot, like even like 3, 4 sessions, and I recognize your face, like you've come in a couple times. Fuko is a great example. I've seen her and her group a couple times. I kind of consider them like sort of regulars now because I've started to see them so often and regularly. Um, that is a group that I consider them regulars, and I like their group. And so they're not even like I'm not even sure what rank they are. It's very very low, right? That's when I. The point is that excuse me, I'm still recovering from the sickness. You can hear from my voice. We're much more welcoming of new players at a much earlier level right now. It's an awesome, awesome change I've seen coming back to iCombat.
You're definitely a lot better at recognizing repeat players than I am, which is super awesome, and especially from a business standpoint.
Thanks.
Uh, but for me to recognize a player, I have to, I think, play with them at least 2 or 3 times before I will really consider them a regular, which is kind of a weird thing to think about because when you're not a player who plays every single weekend, and you come back after like 2, 3 weeks hiatus, which is not very uncommon, and you hear about all these like 2, 3, 4 new regulars that are showing up. I'm like, I don't know who these people are. They're not regulars.
Who are you guys? You're not this great yet. I just looked it up. Fuko's rank 14, and I consider her a regular so far. Given I haven't seen her in about a month and her group in about a month, well, maybe she's like
I
that
was,
was like her stint for it for a while.
I was gonna say I don't know who you're talking about, but go crazy.
I've noticed this skill I pulled up where really, so making memories, short tangent, is about connecting two different ideas. So generally, what you can do is you can get a person's name and their username and their face, and that makes like a good triangle of learning for your brain. You can kind of latch onto that, and it makes it really easy to memorize people's stuff. Imagine like people recognize people's username more often. Like if they come in, they see sixes and sevens, they see the picture, they see the username, and they see their face, and they start to be like, oh, that's sixes and sevens, that's that person. Or they'll see delirium, they'll see their username, and they see your face. And they're like, oh, that's delirium, that's that person, he's right there. And it gets stuck in their brain like that because they're not just making just a name, just a name or something like that.
And it's also just who people refer to each other as, and it's this is another thing that's changed a lot since I've started playing. Because when I started playing, the group was small. It was like 7, 8 people that you had to know as the regulars. So it was always people calling John Qui-Gon, people calling, well, Marco was Marco. He wasn't anything like his username. Uh, everybody, it's interesting who was called their usernames versus who was called their actual names was another thing that's just kind of recognizing who certain people are based off of like me talking to Woodland. Uh,
Oh,
a new player hears me referring to him as Woodland and recognizes him as Woodland.
that might be a great topic for next week. I'm talking about uh, why people's usernames are what they are. Maybe not everyone's okay with us sharing that story, but maybe I'll start collecting data for that. That might be fun. I'm sure some people will love to tell the story of their username.
I think there's a lot behind some and not a lot behind others, but yeah, that's another interesting
Well,
topic we can get into in a
my
later
username is
cast.
just it's just my cat's name and my birthday. Like, okay.
Cool.
I think we can move on to our third topic right now.
I think you're correct. All right.
Uh, our third topic is how we make teams in the back on like a general level, right? Like it's not we're not going to go in crazy depth for a couple of reasons, right? We don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, not what this podcast is about. But we have noticed that sometimes when you guys see us making the teams on the screen, you'll always walk in and ask, "Who made these teams? These teams are not balanced at all." I like to kind of talk about our thought process and why we make teams a certain way. And just, in my opinion, we generally know which team will think will win, but we're surprised more times than not when the other team wins. So often. Not so often, but we generally get it right. but sometimes the other team just demolishes. I'm like, I thought the other team would win this game. Anyways, what do you got?
All right, so we have an old session that I've got written up the regulars from that session. So I've got on this little notepad in front of me, I've got 10 usernames of all the regulars. I'm basically just going to go down the list and explain how I would make the teams for this session. So it's a full session of 30 players, 10 of which are regulars. Right off the bat, I'm kind of not going to include the new players. They are relevant, especially when they make groups, which is important to note, in that especially when they have like a group of 7 and a group of 3, that makes teams really hard to make.
Yep.
And generally, that's when we have to pull the trigger and split their group up, but that's a different topic. Uh, and making teams when it's like an even number of regulars with an even number of new players is obviously very easy, and that's the example I'm going to give right now. So my strategy uh, is basically I kind of snake the top picks, and I go down the list and make teams accordingly. And I don't mean to disclaimer, I don't mean to offend anybody by saying this player is better than you. If you're one of these 10 players, I'm sorry, but I'm ranking you. So get ready for that. Don't come crying to me when I don't think you're as good as you think you are.
Oh no.
I'm but a man. My opinion does not matter. Anyway, so going down this list, I split the teams in this way. So black team, I have with Woodland, Damien, or Frog Champ, Feldonk, Ryan, Cheese Curds against Mac 20, Skulltaker, Decile, Jailer, and Jonas the Red.
So before you move any further, right now, what team do you think wins? That's generally the question I always ask, by the way, or making teams. Like as they're each step of they're going through the process, I ask the person who's making the teams, what team wins right now?
I'd say black team.
I can't read it. Which team is black, left or right?
Left.
Oh yeah, I agree too.
Um, and this is where like the new players matter, and a lot of the times some regulars just have good games. Sometimes you have a good game, sometimes you have a bad game. That's another thing that can just ruin my teams. Is I put Zach on a team and he's having a below Zach session, and it's like, well, there goes my teams. Or I don't know, some
You're
like I
expecting
put like
one
Shay
regular to
out
play a
there.
certain way.
Yeah, I put like Shay out there before, like a month ago. I put Shay on a team and she does really really well, and then my teams are also destroyed because a player I wasn't expecting to do as well is doing really well all of a sudden. But going through my process of making these teams, and keep in mind that these teams were this session was played out a while ago, so the teams were
Yeah, I
set up
scrolled back a year.
a year. Wow, that is a while ago. Um, I'm going to introduce my strategy for building the teams. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to establish in my mind which are my top 3 players in this session. And looking at it, I think it's between Woodland, Frog Champ, and Mac. Those are my contenders for my top 3 here.
I agree with you.
And I'm going to recognize how these players have been playing recently. Damien hasn't played a serious session in like a year. Yeah, I see him right there. He's talking.
It feels so bad talking about people's opinions about people.
Yeah,
So
he
don't
hasn't
get
played a
us wrong
serious
here.
session in like a year. He's playing to preserve his KDR. He's not playing to play like he did years ago. Mac, I think, is a very very strong player. But in all honesty, I'm going to put Woodland as my number 1 for making these teams. Out
So,
of
but
these,
Woodland has this really big problem where he can only see in like a 45-degree cone in front of him. He can't, and if
yeah,
you get behind him at all, he just gets absolutely countered. So everyone has like these big glaring problems that they refuse to to look at.
I
Well,
could
maybe not everyone, but
I could go on a tangent about how I think these players perform in different areas, but And a public session is where Woodland is. It's Woodland's element essentially. Is it? It makes the 10 players that are down here actually relevant. It makes the 10 new players on this team a real
Yeah,
a
it's a
real
huge
thing.
boost. It's a huge boost to them. In the session where it's going to be like the tournament, where it's just everyone knows exactly what they're doing, Woodland definitely gets knocked down a few points because he can't do what his thing. He can't do his thing, right? And you're about to say what that was.
Yeah, so it's going to make all 10 of those new players actually play the objective, which suddenly makes it a lot harder for the 5 regulars on this team to do something.
He's an educator, right? And so he's really good at getting pretty much like generally around a certain age group, really listen, really follow, and really do exactly what he wants them to do for any particular game mode. I've seen it in action. I'm starting to take notes, and I really envy his ability to do that. It's really cool. Even I'll listen to what he says too.
Yeah. And then my next process on that is going to recognize I want to put 1 versus 2. So I have Woodland, then Mac. And then putting 3 over as Damien on black and camo. And I think this is something that is debatable 100% of the time. I think you're not wrong to say what the order is between these 3. I don't think there's a wrong answer in there.
Yeah,
Um, so
it
I have
depends on who's playing the best. Not even during this day, but during these 90 minutes, because they're going to play differently between the sessions and the rest of the day. It's up in the air until we see the session go.
and I think these 3 players are in a different tier than the other 7. So then
Yes.
going down the list, I have 2 players that are in a higher tier on black team against 1 player on camo team. So I need to give the next best 2 players onto the camo team. So I reasoned out that those 2 players are going to be Skulltaker and Decil. Who
Yeah.
I think Skulltaker is honestly pretty close to that line of this upper tier of players. I think he's pretty close to that. And then Decil is just a strong pick.
I agree with you. I wish I could see a bit more. I'm going to pull out my own list. I'm not sure why I'm doing it like that. Continue.
And then moving on, after I give Skulltaker and Decil, I'm like, okay, well, I need to give probably another 2 players over on the black team then. So I would go down the list and give Feldonk and Ryan to the black team. And then I would just continue the snake, and I would go, okay, I think with my remaining 3 players, I want to put the better 2 onto the camo team. So I decide that that's Jonas the Red and Jailer.
Oh, what a sweetheart.
And then finally, I would put the lone cheese curds right onto black team as my number 10.
I really like the way you make teams. Generally when you make teams, it's much more balanced sometimes. I think some staff members are getting pretty good at making teams too. Some people just don't get it. I don't know why they don't get it. And seeing so many games, or maybe because they are just new and they aren't getting it all the time. I'm saying generally you get it. Um, that's why I like it when you make the teams here. I don't know where my thought. I'm just losing it today.
Yeah. So I think that's just kind of a really quick overview of making teams. I think there's a lot of different intricacies that can go into that. Uh, but when someone comes up to me and it's like, why are the teams like this? These teams are bad. I don't think that's a good. I dislike that. I think you
Uh,
need to come up to me and say, this is the problem, not. You need to offer me a solution instead of just yelling at me.
Yeah. Sometimes even when they come up to me and ask them why I made the teams a certain way, what I'll do is I'll just walk them through it, and then they're immediately on my side for some reason. I've done this a couple of times with different people too, given they're all regulars. But I'll bring them up and I'll talk them through my process, and they just end up on my side. I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I can't make it exactly balanced, but I think that's about as close as you can get. Maybe because like not the regulars, the new players made groups and got to keep them a certain way. These guys are on a tournament team, got to keep them on their particular teams. X, Y, Z, all these other different things they're just not thinking about, but trying to make them the exact balanced things. We have other hoops we have to jump through too. Some of them, sometimes they do come up and give me that solution. It's like, yeah, that might work. Let's go ahead and try that. But don't just look at the screen and be like, oh my gosh, the black team wins. I'm not even going to try this session, because you just made it infinitely worse for yourself. And you're just going to cycle and spiral out of control. And you're going to lose the whole session for everyone else because you're not trying anymore.
Yeah, that's certainly it's certainly annoying to see. Moving on, because we're actually going a little bit longer than I expected. But to the 7-day leaderboard, which we actually have some interesting things to talk about today.
Yeah, so this week was the week that everyone's coming out of the woodwork to practice for the tournament, and you're starting to see some names that you don't normally see anymore. Starting off with, looks like the first one I haven't seen on here is IG72. Look at him go.
All the way up at third. We had 3 players from Atlantic Beach show up this last weekend. 2 of them are on our 15-day leaderboard, and that's IG72 and Hans Fett.
Oh, Be Ready's there at the bottom.
He is from O'Fallon.
Oh, frick. I didn't see him. What day did he play on? He come on Saturday?
He came on Saturday.
Look at him go.
Yeah, so IG72 all the way up at third, putting out an 82,000 score, and he actually played less sessions than Hans.
That's just to show how crazy this guy is. He doesn't play, like, I want to see is specifically his stats just for the Waukesha location to see where he ranks there, because that's cool to see. It's just really awesome to see someone that can come from a different field entirely and just play still very, very well. Very good for him.
Yeah, and especially when you play one less session than Hans and you have almost doubled his score, kind of shows how strong of a player you can be. Shows up on our field for like his first time in a year playing on our field, and I believe he won the first session he played.
Nice.
And there was some big names in there. I mean, Sniper was in that session, Woodland was in that session, some other names were in that session as well. So it's a big session to win.
Last week Specs was not on this list either, and he's all the way up there again. So just this week he comes in, slamming on up there. Same with Doki. Doki is not on the list from last week, slamming on up there to number 6 place. Good for him. Hans, we already talked about. Chief was there last week. Are you? You are. You were in 9th last week, and you kept your 9th place spot. Unmoving.
Give me a go. My 3 or 4 sessions I'll play a week, and will get me that.
Even Skull Takers smashed his way up to the 10th place spot. He was not there last week, coming in with a 33,500 kills. Good for him. Live for the Moment is also brand new to this list. Same with Mac. Geez, everyone's on this list. Obviously, Be Ready was not on the list before. Glue Eater wasn't either. And I think Arthas Menethil was on the list last week.
I think he was a 3rd last week.
Yeah. So
he is
we're seeing a lot of people like maybe doing a little bit of procrastinating, doing all their practicing right now. 1 week before the tournament starts.
And looking at the stats for this week, it was a low stat week. So besides score, looking at things like kill streak, kills per minute, KDR, and just kills, those are a lot lower numbers than we saw last week, especially KDR.
Well, that makes sense for me, right? A lot of regulars are playing this week, and everyone's trying to make everyone slow down and play best. There's not a whole lot of big farming going on or even boosting going on.
Oh, I remember on Saturday we had a 31-man session with only 4 players in that session were not tournament players.
Oh,
and those 4 were still regulars. They were still in their Eagles. They just weren't in the tournament.
Do you remember who they were?
It was Jace Mays, Michael, and I'm going to forget the other 2.
That's still so cool. I love seeing sessions like that. Well, given they're so explosive, and they're like sometimes they're either going to do one of two things. They're going to be like exactly balanced, or they're just going to be like a delta 8. It's like gross.
It was a good session actually. It was interesting to watch at the least.
Okay.
All right, so I believe that brings us to the end of episode 3 of the Point Gremlin podcast. Thanks everybody for tuning in today. Once again, just like we've said last week, if you ever have any sort of questions or topics that you ever want to bring up on the podcast, go ahead and just ask me, James, in person, or go ahead and message us on any sort of message board. I know Damien has the Twitter set up to do that. James, any final thoughts before we go ahead and wrap this up?
Well, guys, the tournament's going to be like we have 3 days left. Either watch it here on this Twitch where I'm casting it, or literally just walk in the building and just be there and watching. You're not going to be able to play much that day unless you're playing the public sessions beforehand. But be there. It's going to be really awesome to see. We've got a lot of players in this one. We'll talk more about the tournament next week on the podcast. I don't want to talk about it right now. That's all I got to say, guys. Thank you guys for watching.
All right. Well, we'll talk to you all next week. Thanks for tuning in.